Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 124. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are going to be discussing things that beginners tend to do whenever they get into competitive Pokemon battles that seem great on the surface, but are actually just kind of circumstantial in that not every Pokemon can really afford to do these things, and it's extremely aggressive to try and get off these strategies, but they can work sometimes. And of course, just before we start, obviously every Pokemon on this team is a shiny Pokemon and has a rather suspicious nickname. But starting off, we have Charizard here. Of course, every beginner loves Charizard. Everybody loves Charizard. Charizard's so strong. How could Charizard ever not be strong? And Charizard will definitely not be strong after it gets off a belly drum in order to cut its HP in half to maximize its attack. Very strong. And then we also have the Citrus Berry in order to heal us up a fourth of our health from the belly drum, which means that we only lose about a fourth of our health as long as we get to activate the Citrus Berry. And we have some not so strong moves. And this is one of the traps that I think beginners tend to fall into a lot, is just using the moves that a Pokemon has learned over the course of the journey, where it might have like a kind of neat secondary effect but be a very, very weak move. Because you really tend to want to have the stronger moves when you're in competitive, because you won't have as much setup time, especially since we're already trying to go for that belly drum turn. But we do have the flame charge, and we also have the acrobatics for whenever we've eaten our berry. We have a strong physical flying type attack, so we're using both of our stabs here in kind of weak ways. But because we are Terra Stellar, we get a 1x boost where if we haven't eaten the item for whatever reason, it becomes a 60 base power move, and then flame charge will become a 60 base power move because that's how Terra works. But because they're each two different types, then we get two different boosts on each of those moves, and we can use the Stellar Terra Blast, which will become a physical attack because our attack is currently higher than our special attack. But if we ever get intimidated, it'll just turn into a special attack that'll be slightly weaker. But if we have the belly drum off, then we get to use the full damage of a physical attack that has no resistances, which seems pretty good. Of course, it goes the same for everything on this team, but everything on this team can be beaten with pretty basic defensive play. It's just that beginners really like to be aggressive with their plays, as I mentioned before. And we are the Blaze on Charizard, not only because we are not using the sun, so it doesn't make sense for us to be using solar power, but if we belly drum and then we take an attack that brings us down to less of a third of our HP, then we will get a 1.5 times boost on our flame charge. Next up, we've got Sableye here, and Sableye is meant to represent the idea that beginners don't tend to pick the best items for their Pokemon. Sometimes they'll even give them items like full restores or full heals, which are great during a playthrough because they make you basically invincible. But for actual competitive Pokemon, they don't do anything because the man-made items don't help you at all. So you could, in-game, give your Sableye like a full restore in order to trick it onto the opponent so that they just have a useless item, but there are no useless items in Showdown, as I learned. Like, if we try to give Sableye a full restore, it just doesn't exist. So we're going to be using the Oran Berry here. Quick Claw is also a worthy mention here to put it on Sableye, even though Sableye is already priority with the Prankster. But Oran Berry is just such an inherently weak item that we can trick it onto the opponent and it basically gives them no benefit. Like 10 HP in the grand scheme of things is really nothing. But because we are Prankster Pokemon, we will be getting priority on all of our status moves, which will be the Trick for tricking our item, Will-O-Wisp for burning the opponent to make it so that they do less physical damage to us, and the Skill Swap so that we can put Prankster onto either one of our other Pokemon, or we can try and take an opponent's abilities that's really important for them on a Pokemon that doesn't really value the Prankster. And we also just have Nightshade on Sableye just to get a little bit of 50 damage chip every once in a while. Can go a long way on specific Pokemon. And another honorable mention was to put Stall on the Sableye so that it would always go last and then have like a Metal Burst set, but I feel like that was a little bit too complex for a beginner to pull off. But it is kind of funny, and I thought I would mention it because we're probably not going to use Sableye again in the next 4 teams for the 128 teams challenge. Next up, we've got Dragapult here, and Dragapult is meant to represent the idea that beginners love to click 2-turn moves without really having a reason to be clicking 2-turn moves, because 2-turn moves are really not that great. The usability of them is pretty few and far between, especially ones like Fly and Dig that don't have any secondary effects other than just being a 2-turn move, because 2-turn moves you can use to stall out battles for a little bit longer, because as we saw with like a Dondozo team, I think it was the very last Dondozo team that was a stall dozo. We used Dive on that dozo because we were poisoning the opponent, and then Dive in combination with the 2 turns and our Protect gave us 2 turns where the opponent couldn't hit us and 1 turn where we were hitting them, versus having like Liquidation or Protect, which was just only half of our turns were Protect turns. But there is a niche use for the 2-turn move Phantom Force, because not only does the Dragapult not get a lot of good Ghost type moves, you can warrant running Phantom Force just because it goes through Protect, which makes it one of the best 2-turn moves, if not the single best one, at least for physical. Of course, there's like Meteor Beam and things like that that you can get off and then be stronger. But our Dragapult is going to be running the Power Herb so that we can immediately click Phantom Force into the opponent, which gives us a really strong Ghost type physical attack that the opponent probably will not be expecting. And since Phantom Force breaks protection and our Dragapult is so fast, we can attack the Pokemon that was trying to protect with our second Pokemon more often than not. So it's a really niche, like, kind of surprise tool that you can just Power Herb into Phantom Force and then get it into the opponent, and then you can still use Phantom Force after that. It's just a 2-turn move, so not that great. But then on Dragapult, we also have things like the Dragon Darts for our Dragon type damage and the Dragon Dance in order to boost our attack and speed, and Terra Dragon just so we're getting rid of the Ghost typing defensively so that we can dodge things like Sucker Punch, which this team doesn't really like at all. But also the Dragon will be further boosting our Dragon Darts, allowing us to close out games a little bit more easily, and we're Clear Body so that we are avoiding stat drops on Dragapult. Very, very important. Next up, we've got Hitmonlee, and Hitmonlee is here mostly just because of High Jump Kick. I mean, beginners seem to love clicking that High Jump Kick because it only has a 10% chance to miss, and it has 130 base power, which is a very high base power. Very strong move, and with our Reckless ability, it will be doing even more base power because we'll be getting a 1.2 times boost on our High Jump Kick. So very, very strong fighting type move. It's just that High Jump Kick has a very, very noticeable drawback in that if you miss the High Jump Kick, or you land it into a Protect, or you land it into a Ghost type, you will miss, and when you miss, you will take 50% of your HP, which is quite a lot. So especially in doubles where a lot of Pokemon like to run Protect in order to dodge things like Fake Out, or in order to just preserve themselves for a turn if you're inside of Trick Room or Sun or things like that, it's really not great to be running High Jump Kick or any of its equivalents in doubles, and the scenarios where you can do so are pretty limited. But High Jump Kick isn't our only move on the Hitmonlee, it's just our best damage option in combination with our Terra Fighting. We do have some other support moves on the Hitmonlee in case our opponent predicts us going for High Jump Kick for whatever reason. We can go for the knockoff to maybe try and get rid of an item on the opponent, or if they're going to bring in a Ghost type, then we can hit them for at least neutral damage. And we also have the Taunt in order to stop them from going for status moves, and we have the Coaching in order to increase the attack and defense of our allies, and everybody on the team loves the defense boost, and most of the Pokemon on the team love the attack boost. And just to make sure that Hitmonlee is being extra speedy, we also have the Choice Scarf, just so that whenever we lock into our one move, we have the 1.5 times speed. And this Hitmonlee specifically is a little bit slower than Dragapult, so we can Protect with Dragapult and then go for Coaching, but we can't go for Coaching before Dragapult attacks. But the opposite side of that coin is that we can go for Phantom Force with Dragapult first, and then nothing can protect from being hit by the High Jump Kick. So as long as we don't get the 10% chance to miss it, we will do a lot of damage into that slot. Next up here we have King Gambit, and King Gambit is meant to represent the idea that beginners will often conflate the sets that are good in single battles with the sets that are good in double battles. So more often than not in double battles, you end up seeing Defiant King Gambit because it's really easy to get the Intimidate off into both Pokemon, whereas in singles, Intimidate really isn't that great, and as a result, you also run the Supreme Overlord King Gambit in singles. Because also in doubles, you only get 4 Pokemon that you get to bring, so at most King Gambit is only getting powered up by 3 ally deaths. But in singles, King Gambit gets powered up by the full 5 allied deaths, so it's a much more notable boost. But we're going to be using it in doubles here just to try and stack a lot of multipliers onto King Gambit, where we have the Choice Band in order to increase our damage by 1.5 times, and then if a Pokemon's died, we get a boost from Supreme Overlord, and we have our Terra Dark that we can go for to even further boost the power of either our Sucker Punch or our Kowtow Cleave, and then Iron Head's just here to be another stab, and then Stone Edge is nice to have on King Gambit for the Rock type coverage into some Pokemon that's difficult for us to hit with our other Mons. And lastly here, we're bringing in Yanmega. Yanmega, very loosely, is the idea that beginners tend to put both physical and special attacks on the same Pokemon, and then maybe have investments in order to have both attack and special attack on the same Pokemon. And while this idea can work in very specific instances, it's usually a lot better if you try to focus a Pokemon's stats in either attack or special attack so that they can do the maximum amount of damage while still having EVs left over for things like HP or speed. But this Yanmega is going to be able to use both physical and special attacks because we have the U-turn that we can use to pivot this Pokemon out, and we have the speed boost, so as long as we protect for a turn and get a speed boost, there's not too much that will be outspeeding us without forms of speed control like Tailwind or Thunder Wave into us. And with the Focus Sash, we also get another turn to get a speed boost as long as the opponent doesn't double into us or they have a multi-hit move. But Yanmega is going to be giving us a little bit more support in the fact that we have the Struggle Bug, which is a 50 base power bug attack that will lower the special attack of both Pokemon that it hits. And we also have the Air Slash just for a bit of consistent flying type damage into the opponent that maybe we could get a flinch since we're going to be so fast. It's going to at least give us a chance to flinch something. It's just whether or not that flinch ends up working out is anybody's guess. But yeah, that's the basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so first up we have a battle against a Smeargle Muck team, where usually the purpose of the team is to get Moody on Muck and then bring in Flamigo in order to copy the Muck's evasion boost and any stat boost that it has gotten because of the Moody, and then just be unhittable and then try and sweep the opponent from there. So they lead Goldango and Murkrow here, not in a Muck immediately, but we lead Charizard and Kingambit, and we immediately see them retreat into Muck, probably expecting a Dark-type move to go into that slot from our Kingambit, but they taunt our Charizard here as we Flame Charge the Muck in order to try and deal with the Steel-type, but we get the critical hit Stone Edge on the Murkrow, which I don't think the critical hit matters, but it definitely does help a little bit. Also landing the Stone Edge there inherently is a little bit lucky, but now we have a Prankster Muck, and Prankster Muck means that its status moves are going to be going first, so it could get out of hand kind of quickly, especially now that Smeargle is on the field, and it gets a Fake Out into Kingambit, which means that Kingambit won't be moving, and Muck gets off its first evasion boost. We Flame Charge into Smeargle there, thinking Smeargle might just redirect, or Muck could protect here, but Smeargle gets a defense boost, which means that it lives another Flame Charge, which is slightly unfortunate. Kingambit leaves because it was choice banded into the Stone Edge, and with Muck already going for the evasion, we don't want to be risking an inaccurate move into it. So Charizard is building up its speed with the Flame Charges, but we're just not doing enough damage to the Smeargle to KO it because of that defense boost. And Muck is building up its evasion. Moody is not helping Smeargle this turn. Muck does get a Prankster Toxic into Charizard as we go for the Belly Drum here, as now that we have Dragapult in, we can go for the Dragon Darts to take out Smeargle, and the second Darts doesn't redirect because of the Follow Me, I believe there, or it just misses the Muck. Not entirely sure, but we Belly Drum Flame Charge into Goldango in order to take that out, and we try and go for Dragon Darts, but Dragon Darts misses the Muck, and Muck is protecting so that it can Toxic Stall us, but all we need to do at this point is just hit the Muck one time. In fact, we can get off a D-Dance pretty free there with the Dragapult, and Acrobatics is going to deal the damage that we needed to deal into Muck because we land the attack into it. So just an example of a really passive team there where the opponent played pretty defensively with their muck, but because we got the lucky hit on the muck, all of that was for naught, and we still had like 2 healthy Pokemon in the back basically. Here we have a team that has a lot of offensive pieces and also good speed control in the Whimsicott for those offensive pieces, but they also have Diglett, and Diglett can make things a little bit difficult because we want to attack into it to KO it, but it could focus sash and then endeavor into a lot of our Pokemon in order to reduce their HP down, and also it'll keep us from switching out our mons that we have on the field. But first, Dragapult comes in, and the Hitmonlee comes in, and they lead Quaquaval and Farigiraf, and they immediately go for the Detect because they probably either wanted to Trick Room or go for an attack with Farigiraf. So Quaquaval is going to Protect here, but we get the Phantom Force into Quaquaval, and that takes that slot out, and then Hitmonlee follows up with the High Jump Kick. So we get to KO Quaquaval that turn, and if they had swapped into the Goldango, for example, the Ghost typing, then Phantom Force would have done a lot of damage into it, so it was pretty safe for us to go for the Phantom Force High Jump Kick there. But Farigiraf does in fact go for the Expanding Force into Hitmonlee, and Hitmonlee does not take it, as now Hydreigon comes onto the field and we can bring in Kingambit because the biggest threat to Kingambit was the Quaquaval. Hydreigon goes Terra Steel here as we protect Dragapult, and they Earth Power Kingambit, but it doesn't do too much because we Terrestrialize to Dark. But they do swap in Diglett here, and Diglett gets brought down to its Focus Sash at 98%, which technically should be 99%, but it's probably because Diglett's HP is so low that it kind of works out weird with the percentages. But Hydreigon Terrestrialized to Steel, probably expecting a Dragon-type move from the Dragapult so that it could resist it. Diglett's going to Protect here, and we Dragon Darts because we wanted to hit Diglett, but also Hydreigon, and Hydreigon fires back with a Dark Pulse into the Dragapult, but we get a critical hit Countdown Cleave into Hydreigon, which might prove important here as we bring in Sableye as our last mon, and they bring in Farigiraf. But now that they have Farigiraf in, we cannot Sucker Punch into Diglett, which is pretty unfortunate. Diglett gets to endeavor into Kingambit, and Hyper Voice is going to take out Kingambit, but we get to go for our Nightshade with Diglett. And at this point, it's really awkward because we can't hit the Farigiraf because the Farigiraf has Armor Tail, and our only damaging move is the Nightshade. But the Farigiraf's only damaging moves are Expanding Force and Hyper Voice, both of which can't hit Sableye. So we're kind of stuck at a standstill, and I did the math on the amount of PP that each Pokemon has left, and Farigiraf has about 45 moves left in its move pool because of the Trick Room. Does not give it very many PPs, but Sableye has way more moves at like 70 moves, so the Farigiraf would start struggling before the Sableye. It's just a matter at that point of whether or not Sableye takes the struggles, but since Farigiraf is a special attacker, it probably does not take it does not do more damage to Sableye with the struggles than Farigiraf would take in the recoil. And lastly, we have a battle against a snow team that doesn't have many actual snow components. Like, everything on this team enjoys the Aurora Veil, it's just that none of them actually have that much utility in the snow. So we start the battle with Kingambit and Yanmega, and they start the battle with Ninetales and Goldango, which is a pretty good lead for us. They bring in Primarina here and they ghost Ninetales, hoping probably that they could survive an Iron Head. But Countdown Cleave actually does a lot because we're Choice Bandit into Primarina, and Primarina is also not a very good defense tank. So even though Primarina resists the Kowtow inside of the Aurora Veil, it still does a lot. But now because the Ninetales ghosted, we can click Struggle Bug here, and now that we have the speed boost, Yanmega is faster. They Icy Wind into us here, which does make Kingambit slow and gets rid of the speed boost that we had. But since we're not Defiant, we don't get an attack boost off the speed drop, so they're pretty free to just Moonblast into us there, as the Countdown Cleave does take out the Ninetales, and Yanmega gets its speed boost back, but the Extreme Speed Chip and Struggle Bug from the Yanmega is really what's going to save Kingambit here, as if we had not dropped the special attack on the Primarina, then Primarina probably would have KO'd Kingambit with the Moonblast. But we do get a Countdown Cleave crit into Dragonite, which is pretty important. I think Dragonite would have lived and then gotten off another Extreme Speed into Kingambit, and then that Extreme Speed would have KO'd since it did 10% last time. But King Gambit gets to live for another turn as Yanmega continues to get faster, and we just keep clicking the struggle bug in order to make sure both of these special attackers have a low special attack stat. Gholdengo is trying to combat that, as since King Gambit is choice banded, it can't sucker punch the Gholdengo even if... But Primarina being faster means that it KOs the King Gambit, but Primarina's special attack is pretty low at this point. We're still just clicking Struggle Bug with Yanmega doing Slight Chip. Knockoff into Gholdengo gets rid of its leftovers as Gholdengo is still nasty plotting up, and Moonblast does not do enough damage to take out Hitmonlee, but now we are outside of the Snow and the Aurora Veil. Air Slash into Gholdengo, and the Knockoff does enough damage to KO it, as Moonblast does enough damage to KO Hitmonlee. And we're nearing max speed Yanmega here, but now we can just bring in the Charizard to Terra Stellar and then get that Terra Stellar Terra Blast into Primarina. So I feel like in that game, the opponent definitely underestimated the utility of the Yanmega, as if they had decided to Moonblast into it with Primarina very early on, that Primarina would have kept its special attack boost, and if we hadn't crit that Dragonite like we did, then Primarina would have had some more play because the extreme speed and Moonblast would have taken down the King Gambit on that one turn, but I still think Charizard in the back with the option to go for the Terra Stellar Terra Blast would have solved any of our problems, especially if the opponent had used Terrestrialization in a different way with Ninetales, since they didn't get much use out of the Ghost Terra. So yeah, that was the things that beginners tend to do when they're first playing competitive Pokemon, and there's no set rules to playing competitive Pokemon. Anything and everything can work, theoretically. It's just that it's important to know that defensive counterplay does exist, and more often than not when you use a Pokemon like this Charizard, for example, that only has single target attacks, it's very easy to use a Pokemon with like Follow Me and Redirection that can just redirect the big damage attack, and then the Pokemon that's next to the Follow Me Pokemon can just take out Charizard, and then you're just out of a Charizard at that point. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things help me out an absolute ton, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.